Welcome everybody to the Chicago Club Travel Show. I'm Dorothy Pacella, and along with Bill Hoffman, we've been bringing you these travel shows all seasons long since we've had to close. As you probably know, since we couldn't take you on our bus tours, we went to the destinations and filmed the event with all of our activities with the help of Hoffy and my cameraman, husband, editor, Carmen. So we've done this for 10 shows, and believe it or not, we've done 21 destinations. We've been really busy. But what we thought we'd do tonight is bring you a collection of our very favorite shows, all 21 destinations, little clips, just so you can remember all the great places we've been. And if you haven't seen the show, we hope maybe you just get in the car and drive to them as well, because they're really not far from the village at all. So sit down, get comfortable, and by all means, fasten your seatbelt, because we're driving fast to 21 locations. Enjoy! Welcome everyone to the Chicago Club Travel Show. I'm Dorothy Pacella, your host for this afternoon, and we look forward to bringing you another great show. Right? Because our first destination is the missions. We're doing the missions today. You may not know that there are 21 missions throughout California, founded by Father Sarah with those missions. San Luis Rey in Oceanside and San Juan Capistrano in San Juan. They're both beautiful missions, and you're in for a treat because we've got a lot of great things to show you.
As you know, President Nixon lived in San Clemente, and he loved to come to San Juan Capistrano. He ate at El Adobe a lot. He played golf at Shore Cliffs. He visited the mission. This plaque is to commemorate his visit with his wife. And up above are some of the mission bells. The ones on the right are actual original mission bells. The ones on the left are replicas. The mission bells were very important because in those days there were no pagers or cell phones or telephones. So the bells were used to commemorate the mass, funerals, and meetings. The bells were I would say the telephone. Famous things about San Juan Capistrano are the famous swallows. As I said before, they are cliff swallows. They come all the way from Argentina. You can see some of their nests up there. They make their nests out of mud, and therefore swallows need a muddy area where they can grab soil and make their nests. They're very busy birds. And in 1933, an American composer wrote a song called When the Swallows Come Back to Capistrano. So we will take a look at the beautiful mission.
That's the day you promised you'd come back to me. Come back to me. When you whisper farewell in Capistrano, 'twas the day the swallows flew out to the sea. Out to the sea. All the mission bells will ring. The chapel choir will sing. The happiness you'll bring will live in my memory. When the swallows come back to Capistrano, that's the day I pray that you'll come back to me.
Okay, Chicago Club, we have visited so many beautiful places. The most famous of them are National Historic Landmarks like Hotel del Coronado. Here's the plaque. I always look for the plaque when we went to Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The Space Facilities Center is a National Historic Landmark. So this beautiful mission, which is called the King of the Missions, is so important historically, and it's so beautiful. It was declared by the federal government as a National Historic Landmark in 1970. Mission San Juan Capistrano applied but did not get that status. This shows you how beautiful this mission is.
And we have some great places for you to visit. Specifically, we're doing wineries and we're doing ranches. So it's really important, and we love this whole environment, so we're so fortunate to have it. And we're only an hour away from the village.
Anymore when
So
it
I know
won't get
it's
any
not
better,
usual.
per se. There's a lot of chemical reactions that are going on in this guy, and there's a lot of testing that can be done chemically, but nothing substitutes just tasting it. And your human perception and the ability to taste and enjoy is really wonderful. Now, so this is a fun little blend in a very small barrel, as you can see. This is a
Yes.
half barrel.
Okay.
This
We've had so much fun today, and we're still looking for wineries. And I found one. Still in Escondido. We're still 1 hour from the village, and this winery is absolutely beautiful. It's Orfila, and it's one of the best wineries around. So as we begin to go through the tour today, we have a very special day planned for us.
Scary for
as I
folks,
begin
I
to
think,
go-
just they don't want to be wrong. You know, they feel that what they might explain about wine is not correct.
Right.
So they're fearful of that. Nobody wants to look like they don't know what they're saying. So what my process is, you know, I'm trying to teach my staff here not only the typical tasting notes, but how does it affect you? What's the memory you have of that aroma? I've had some girls say, boy, that just reminds me of my grandfather when he made wine at home on the farm, or that reminds me of the time I was in DC and was smelling the cherry blossoms blooming.
Right.
I mean, you know, it's amazing the different
Connection,
triggers
right.
that happen. So I teach my folks to explain things like that to so people can relate as
Right.
well. And they start thinking, oh, that reminds me. And I go, that's your tasting notes. So
Right.
that's special to you, and it's something to share to all, because you can, I feel at that point, you're describing it from your own heart. So it's the
Right.
truth.
Right.
So you're not, you know, when you read things like there's a little tobacco in there, your average person's not
Right.
going to understand. And I even sometimes go, yeah, okay, I guess. I don't
Yeah,
get that
yeah,
myself.
right.
So I try to be upfront about that. You know, it's like, well, I know some of these notes say some of these things,
Right.
but this is what I get, and this is where I'm at. And I think it just becomes more relatable
Right.
to your average person, where they feel that, hey, one, they learned something, and they know how now to apply themselves to wines,
Right.
and explain later to their friends.
Now, there are people that say, I only like white or I only like red. Is there a clinical reason for that, or is it
Well,
just taste, like you said?
Yes, a lot of that is personal perspective, you know, personal taste. A lot of people, I believe, when they say they're not into the reds, they may not have been introduced to reds the right way. There is on the lighter side of reds, you can, you know, it's almost like coffee.
Yeah.
So when you drink coffee your first time, or a beer, or anything like that, it's an acquired taste. Wine is an acquired taste for sure. Some people are more tolerant of the robust. Some people just are not. They just don't like that.
Right.
So when they say red or white, you know, that's just kind of a common thing to say. But it doesn't mean that they would not enjoy some of the lighter reds.
Right.
They just haven't been
Haven't
introduced to the
introduced
right thing yet.
That's right. So let's go see your tasting room. We
Let's
hope
do
you
it.
enjoyed the show. We've had so much fun, as usual, bringing you these great destinations. Our goal today was to bring you wineries, ranches, and maybe a little romance. So we've had so much fun, and we've enjoyed this area. Again, we're a little over an hour from the village, but this is beautiful, beautiful territory, and it brings a lot of variety and importance to the state of California. The history is rich, the views are beautiful, and the wine is just as great. So thanks for joining us. See you next month, and come join the fun in San Diego County. Before we leave this wonderful winery, we wanted to spend some time talking about the San Pasqual Valley. I mentioned it earlier about the significance with wineries, But indeed, this winery in this valley is far more significant than just wine. In California history, the Battle of San Pasqual absolutely occurred right here in that valley. It was 1846, and this battle occurred between the United States Army and the Californios, who occupied this area of California. Californios were Mexican-born, but they were born here in California. And this whole area belonged to Mexico in the 1840s. And there were 7,000 of them in this area. And they were ranchers. They were horsemen. And they knew exactly what they were doing, and they loved this particular area. And what happened in the 1840s is General Kearny from the U.S. Army was dispatched to come here because, in fact, the Californios were getting restless. It seems that at this point, the United States government already occupied Northern California. And Commander Stockton sent his troops down here and began to put enforcements of different codes and restrictions. And they were unhappy with that. So they began to rebel. So General George Kearny came here from Texas, and he was dispatched from Texas. Well, he didn't know what he was facing. It was a 2,000-mile march, but he didn't know about the desert. I guess he didn't have GPS. So as he crossed the desert, he lost all of his horses because of starvation and the lack of water. So General Kearny had to put his troops on their mules, and they finally came to this beautiful valley to fight the Carnetos, the Californios. And it was interesting because he had planned to attack and surprise them. But in fact, one of his commanders jumped the gun and came early. And when that happened, 17 of the Army soldiers were slaughtered because the Californios, being ranchers, lassoed them and brought them to the ground and stabbed them with lances. The next day, General Kearny had the guns, he had the cannons, and he was able to clear the area. But in essence, we lost the battle. The United States Army lost that battle. After that happened, Kearny limped his way down to San Diego. And believe it or not, 1846, the United States Navy and the United States Marines were already in San Diego. And that's where General Kearny hid. At that point, they recovered, and within a month.
Okay, we are at the Leo Carrillo Ranch Historic Park, and Leo Carrillo was a very prominent actor and preservationist and a rancher. In fact, he was one of the most famous Hispanic actors of the 20th
So
century.
glad you decided to join us today. We have a great show planned, and I'm Dorothy Picella, your host. And as always, we have Bill Hoffman, otherwise loved as Hoffy, to be our tour guide today in our historic cities. Today's program is going to be great because we've decided to go visit the historic cities of Orange and Santa Ana. And believe it or not, once again, we're only 20 minutes from the
Okay,
village.
in 1871, Andrew Glassell and Alfred Chapman, they were two lawyers, bought some land here, and they laid out a grid pattern of streets for a city that they called Richland. Turns out that they couldn't use the name Richland because there was a town that had a post office called Richland. So they selected the name Orange. But what I love about what those guys did is they laid out this beautiful elliptical plaza, and there's a big debate, is it round or is it elliptical? It's actually elliptical. But they were smart enough to leave this land open for a downtown gathering place, which is fantastic. Now let's take a look at what it looked like. This was the plaza in the early 1900s, and the city would take pride in landscaping it.
Old historic
And then
town
prior to
visits.
that-
As you might be able to tell, we're in Santa Ana now, and we've been cruising the town, and you're going to see a lot of the highlights of Santa Ana, the absolute historic seat of Orange County. The gorgeous building behind me is one that might look familiar to some of you that have traveled with us on the Chicago Club. So once again, Hoffy's here to give us our history. So here we go.
Okay, so this is the old courthouse in Santa Ana. Orange County broke away from LA County in 1889, and there was a competition between Anaheim and Santa Ana as to who would be the county seat, and Santa Ana won. And in 1900, they dedicated this beautiful Romanesque building. And okay, hello Chicago Club. We are now in the Santa Ana portion of our tour, and I know you love tacos. Tacos could be the best food in the world. And Santa Ana has a lot of people who love tacos. And there's nobody better at making tacos than Roberto from El Gordito. Yes, that's right. And his wife also.
We're here today on our new adventure. It's July, and we're downtown Los Angeles. We're actually at Union Station, and it's the hub of all of transportation for our Metrolink and Amtrak stations. And
okay, hello Chicago Club, this is Hoffy. We're excited to be in downtown LA. Despite challenges, downtown LA is making a great comeback. And they recently restored the ceiling, so let's go inside this Mission Moderne landmark. We're now inside the lobby of the Union Station, and 8 years ago they did an amazing restoration. They were getting it ready for the Oscars, and they were up in the scaffolding, and they looked at the ceiling, and it looked kind of grimy. They didn't look like there was any patterns. Look at what they discovered. When they took away the tar and the smoke from decades and decades of dust and smoking, they uncovered these amazing Art Deco wildflower patterns, and they painstakingly restored them. They also took samples of the early paint, so they would be original. They would keep the original paint colors. Then they went over to the ticket concourse, and you can see we have a beautiful painted Art Deco ceiling with these Art Deco chandeliers. And this is the ticket concourse where they had the Academy Awards this year. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And maybe we could focus in on the Art Deco detailing at the top and these beautiful Art Deco chandeliers. Remember, this is the last great train station of any American city. Okay, so when you visit Little Tokyo, you look for the fire tower, the Yagura, and with the blue tile at the top, that is the entrance of the Japanese Village Plaza. And this is historic First Street. So this is the heart of Little Tokyo. Okay, here we are on Broadway Street in Chinatown, and the New York Times has called Chinatown the most exciting place to eat in Los Angeles, with over 10 restaurants that they recommended, including bakeries. And we sampled the delicious food at the Angry Eatery. Wes Avila. Here we are at Alvera Street, the original street of Los Angeles. It was named after an LA judge. It was a dusty old street, because remember, LA was founded in 1781. But in the 1930s, a woman named Christine Sterling thought it would be a good idea to take advantage of the Mexican and Spanish heritage of Los Angeles, and she made this a tourist street. It is now one of the great pedestrian streets in the U.S. So let's take a stroll down La Calle Olvera, or Alvera Street. You can buy a lucha libre mask, which is probably around $10. You can buy very colorful Mexican embroidered outfits. And look at, it's just a delightfully fun street with some actually quite good restaurants. This is the Go for Broke World War II memorial for the soldiers, the Japanese American soldiers who fought for our country during World War II. It's called Go for Broke. And despite the fact that they were discriminated against, and this monument actually talks about the internment or relocation centers as concentration camps. Despite that discrimination and treatment, they nevertheless fought bravely for the United States in the European and Pacific theater.
They're with you.
Okay, well, hello Chicago Club. This is Hoffy. I'm so happy to be with you. This show for this March is my hometown, Laguna Beach. I love this town. I've lived here for over 40 years, and we're going to give you the backstory. Everybody knows about the art festivals, but we want to give you the backstory. So first of all, in the early 1900s, artists began to come to this beautiful area because they were attracted by the natural beauty. Okay, everybody, we're at Crescent Bay Point Park, which I think has one of the most beautiful views in Orange County. This is kind of a secret little park that people don't know about, but I really enjoy it for the body surfing and the views. So first of all, you can see Crescent Bay in the foreground. I said that Laguna Beach has about 14 beautiful coves. And the water is so clear because there's no rivers that come into Laguna. Only when it rains, Laguna Creek comes in, and there's a little bit of pollution, but in general it's very clear. So this is Main Beach Park. You can see the 1929 lifeguard tower, and this is where everybody congregates.
For us to share with you. But we're at another part of Laguna Beach. Really? But there's no beach here. Guess where we are? The Alta Laguna Park. No lie, we are this high in this beautiful, beautiful park, and we're literally the top of the world, and that's what it's known as. So Hoffy's brought us up here because there's so much to do in this park, and truly, it's not the beach.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. I'm so lucky. I live in top of the world. This is 1,000 feet up, and we're surrounded by the Laguna Greenbelt. And that's, I think, Laguna Beach's greatest achievement, saving this open space. And if we take a look, this is how much open space was saved. It was Aliso and Woods Canyon, Laguna Wilderness Park, Crystal Cove State Park, and the Irvine Company also donated part of Shady Canyon and Bomber Canyon. So this is 22,000 acres of precious open space.
Chicago Club.
And
we're so excited that you're joining us today because we have another great program planned for you. We hope you enjoyed our last travel show, and we're going to continue to keep doing these for you. As you know, we love being on the bus and traveling to all of our destinations. But the Chicago Club figured out, well, if we can't take you on a bus, why don't we take you through the magic of video and the great TV6 show that we're showing today. Today's going to be fun because we're going to two coastal cities, Dana Point and San Clemente. The important part of this, though, is that the Dana Point is exactly 20 minutes straight down Moulton. So it doesn't take long to get there, and it's a great opportunity to come explore some of the towns that are very close to the village. Get in your car and drive. As you know, our host today is Bill Hoffman. And so what we're doing is taking you to Dana Point, and we all know Bill, and we love Bill. So we're starting here in Dana Point in a very important part, and I particularly am intrigued because the history of Dana Point. I've been coming here for years, and half the things Bill has already shared with me, I had no idea. So hold on, get comfortable, get a drink, have a Coke, and we're going to take you on a tour down to Dana Point and enjoy the beauty of this beautiful coastal city.
Yeah.
And Bill Hoffman, if you haven't been on our buses, come visit us in the future. But many of you, hundreds of you, know Bill Hoffman. So I introduce Bill to give us our guide for the great day we have planned.
thank you, Dorothy, and hello, Chicago Club. I'm Bill Hoffman. I prefer the name Hoffy, and I'm excited to talk about two coastal cities today, Dana Point and San Clemente. They both have a very interesting history, and they have something in common. Both cities were started by developers that wanted to build a Spanish village by the sea. They built some beautiful Spanish colonial architecture, but unfortunately the Great Depression hit and they had to abandon their dreams. So in this program, our second show, we're going to take a look what happened to the dream and how are the cities trying to resurrect that dream. And if you take a look at this stream-spanning arch, you can see that Dana Point has really brought history back. They're refurbishing their entire town center and they're bringing back historical aspects. But Dana Point is different than San Clemente because of this guy, Richard Henry Dana. Back in the 1830s, he sailed all the way from New England, and he thought that Dana Point was the most beautiful spot on the California coastline. and he loaded hides onto the ship as he went up and down the coast of California. He was a great man, a brave man. He went back to New England, became a lawyer, and we'll talk about him later. But the city is named after Richard Henry Dana, and they think they chose a real hero. So we can take a look at Dana Point, and this is the Lantern District. So let's go learn about the lanterns. Years ago, Dana Point adopted a town center plan. They wanted to revitalize this central area. There were too many vacant lots. So what they did is they brought in a consultant, and they did some beautiful streetscape improvements, and they brought in some big development, and you'll see that later. At the cliff above the Dana Point Harbor. And it used to be a fantastic surf spot. It was called Killer Dana. Look at how long these rides were. You notice that the surfer has what they call a right shoulder. He's going to his right. And they catch the wave here. They come all the way in. It was a 1.5-minute ride. That was Killer Dana. But in 1971, they built a beautiful marina. The surfers were not happy, but the boaters were. Take a look at the beautiful Dana Point Marina. And to the right, you can see the promontory. That's the headlands of Dana Point, a very famous area. And by the way, Dana Point is really famous for surfing. We have Doheny State Beach, but Hobie Alter worked in Dana Point, and he lived there for a while, and he built the famous Hobie Cat, the catamaran with the colorful sails. He also developed the best way to use foam surfboards. So Hobie Alter and the other guy, Bruce Brown, who did the famous surf film, The Endless Summer, they're both worked and lived in Dana Point. So Dana Point has a strong tradition of surfing, Killer Dana, and also the surfing entrepreneurship, surfing and sailing. And you can also see the Ocean Institute in the background. It's that beautiful shed-style building, and it's a beautiful museum. It's a great place to go. They have weddings there, and then boats go out for whale watching. They also explore the very fragile and beautiful ecosystem, which is this part of the Pacific coast. By the way, they're going to redesign this entire marina. It was built in a nautical style in the 70s and 80s, which people consider a little old-fashioned now. Therefore, they're going to build it in a tech modernistic style. And I'm curious to see what the architecture is going to look like. I think it'll look a little bit more like the Ocean Institute. So we are now going to go explore what Richard Henry Dana, why did he stop here in Dana Point? What was the attraction? And it puts both of our skills to work. It gives us something to do. And I see this hidden gem, this little bluff trail. It's called the Bluff Hide Trail. It's a historic trail along the bluff, so follow me. So this is the famous statue called the Hide Drower. And these were the sailors that came from New England. They went around Cape Horn. That's a dangerous trip. Imagine that. There was no Panama Canal. They came up the coast of South America, and their goal was hides. They bought hides from the missions. And once the cattle were slaughtered, they dried the hides out, and they would throw them off the cliffs down to the boats. And they would row the hides to the brig Pilgrim. And Richard Henry Dana was so athletic that if some of the hides didn't make it all the way down the cliff, he would actually climb the cliff to get the hides. But by the way, why are hides so important? Because of leather. New England needed leather for boots and hats and shoes. And as you know, the New England climate is not conducive for raising cattle. So these hides were so important, they called them California banknotes. But Dorothy, don't you think that's a beautiful statue? Pretty dramatic.
Absolutely gorgeous. When you look at him in detail, he's got his knife back here. I hope you enjoyed today's show. This is our last stop today in Dana Point. And what I'm hugging is a part of the Pilgrim Brig vessel that actually sunk here in the last year. So often when people come to Dana Point, they're looking for the brig, and it's gone. This is all that's left, folks. But it's neat to hug something that literally has so much historic perspective for us. Not to mention the anchor, but the braids that they have, and it's so important. So we hope you've enjoyed coming to Dana Point. This is our last stop. So Hoppy's going to share with us the last part of our history lesson here at the brig.
Okay, so I think this is a good place to end our stop at Dana Point. So once again, here's Richard Henry Dana. He was from a fairly wealthy family. He was actually at Harvard University, and he had an illness, and he decided it would be good for him to have an adventure and get some fresh air. So he went aboard the brig Pilgrim all the way around Cape Horn and up the coast of California. And he said that Dana Point was the most beautiful stop. So you can see the cliffs here. And what they did was the brig Pilgrim and other New England merchant ships brought finished goods to the missions in exchange for the cowhides. And they threw those cowhides off the cliffs and they loaded them onto the brig Pilgrim. And Richard Henry Dana went up and down the coast, and his book is called 2 Years Before the Mast, and probably the most famous book about early California history, because he was here in 1835. And one of the things I like that he talks about, he goes up to Santa Barbara and he actually goes to a fandango. Because if you think about it, 1835 to 38 was the Mexican rancho period. The ranchos dominated California life, and they would have these parties called fandangos with food and dancing. And he was very impressed with the wonderful clothing and the dances and the food of the California ranchos. And one more thing about Richard Henry Dana, which I think is great. After he came home, after collecting all these hides, he became a lawyer, and he spent most of the rest of his adult life fighting for sailors' rights. Because if you can imagine, in the 1830s and 40s, sailors had almost no rights. They were often, there was corporal punishment, and they had almost no rights. So not only was he a great explorer and an author, he also fought for human rights. So I think Richard Henry Dana is a super important man and a very good man. And Dana Point is smart to name themselves after him. So I hope you've enjoyed this look at Dana Point. Remember, it started from the famous visitor, Richard Henry Dana, who exchanged hides with a mission, who was aboard the brig Pilgrim, which sadly has sunk. And by the way, my children, and many children, would spend a night on the brig Pilgrim. They would swab the decks and act like a sailor. And it was part of the, I think it was 4th grade education. My kids actually hated it, especially my son, because the sailors would order them around, which I thought was hilarious. So I hope they can reconstruct the brig Pilgrim. I think it'd be wonderful. And one more thing. Think about Dana Point. After the famous visitor, Dana Point doesn't grow very much, but then Sidney Woodruff, the developer from Hollywood, the developer of Hollywoodland, comes and builds a Spanish resort with all these Spanish colonial homes. We saw the Resort Hotel, which sadly was never completed because of the Great Depression. And then we took a look at Dana Point, bringing back the old lanterns of the ships, bringing back the history. And then the town center, where they're really building some rather large buildings, multi-story buildings with contemporary architecture. So Dana Point has good history, and it also has a town center, which is going to be quite vibrant. So Dorothy, we're going to conclude with you, and thank you very much, everybody.
We have an audience today. We hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we have producing it and visiting Dana Point today. I always get excited when I'm able to walk on the land that one of our founders of California walked on in 1835. It just blows me away. The other beauty part of our show is, particularly those of you that have traveled with us on our travels, when Bill does our bus tour, we'll arrive at our destination and he'll point to the different things to look at. And the beauty of what we're doing now is he takes you to the things he wanted you to see had you been on the bus and got off the bus. So again, as you have heard me say many times, our tours with Bill is not only the destination but the journey. But today's been all about the journey. So we appreciate your time with us today, and we hope you've enjoyed the show.
And now we're off
Now we're off to San Clemente.
Another Spanish village.
Spanish town.
Another Spanish village by the sea, and this time it was Ole Hansen who had the dream. So we're gonna share the dream of Ole Hansen and find out what became of it. Okay, let's move.
Welcome everyone to our next segment of the Chicago Club Travel Show. As promised, we've traveled down Coast Highway to continue our story of seaside coastal cities and their historic stories to our cities. So here we are in San Clemente, short drive, and again, our objectives with our show is to have you come to beautiful cities. We know we can't be on the bus, and we miss you all terribly, but we want to share with you some locations that you can go to on your own. So right now, we were a short ride from Dana Point. So if you had done that earlier, it's not far from Dana Point, straight down Coast Highway. Or if you come down the 5 freeway, it was 15 minutes from the village. So here we are in San Clemente, and we're going to have a great time and learn a lot about this beautiful city. And of course, we still have Hoffy to join us for our education and our show this afternoon. So Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
We're still
Thank you,
here.
Dorothy.
We made it.
Yep, we made it. It's a beautiful morning as usual. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our week 2 show. We're in San Clemente, which is actually, if you think about it, is the southernmost city in the LA Orange County metropolitan area. And it has a really exciting story to tell. It started from the dream of a man named Ole Hansen. He used to be the mayor of Seattle, and he saw this beautiful stretch of land, and he thought, I'm going to make a community. In fact, he proposed the first master plan community, really, in the whole Orange County area. When we go back to the story of Ole Hansen, you might wonder how San Clemente got its name. It got its name from the famous Spanish explorer Sebastián Vizcaíno, who in 1602 left Mexico, came all the way up the coast of California, and he landed at San Clemente Island on November 23rd. And that's the date for the patron saint, Saint Clement. So San Clemente comes from Saint Clement. San Diego County, and we have beautiful San Clemente. So what we're going to do now is we're going to stroll down Del Mar Street and take a look at their downtown. What do you think of downtown San Clemente?
It's fabulous. There's such a great mixture of restaurants and retail, and just wonderful things to do in such a short walk.
Yeah. Do you come here to eat sometimes?
All the time.
Oh, I love it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Really great restaurants.
I think this is turning out to be one of Orange County's best downtowns. There's a lot of specialty retail. You don't see a lot of chain stores like Pottery Barn. And look at, they have a nice wide sidewalk. They have beautiful shade trees. They have hanging baskets. They have vintage lamps. I mean, San Clemente did it right. And I remember in the 60s, people would laugh, San Clemente's just kind of a boring retirement area. No way. They've done a beautiful job with their downtown. And you can see most of the buildings are Spanish colonial on both sides. Hello. And another thing that's quite nice, San Clemente has a lot of courtyards. You can see the courtyard over there. You can see this beautiful courtyard. That's a gorgeous building. Hotel San Clemente. I've never been there. It's a historic landmark. So look at that.
They're apartments.
That is beautiful. Oh yeah. Yeah, Hotel San Clemente. So beautiful job here. Now coming down here, we're going to visit our second show at the San Clemente Pier. It's 1,100 feet long. It was built originally by Ole Hansen, who had this beautiful dream, but big waves destroyed it in the 30s and in the 80s, and they had to keep rebuilding it because you can have some really big waves here. But as we take a look at the pier, this area is called the Pier Bowl. It's an area with a lot of Spanish colonial homes. You can see the green flag, meaning the waves are small today, but they're still good surfing. And then if we pan a little bit further south, you can take a look here. You can see where those surfers are. That's a famous surf spot called Trafalgar Lane.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November Chicago Club show. We're so happy you joined us today because this is going to be a very special show. It's November, and November is all about our veterans. And the Chicago Club wanted to recognize all of our veterans, but as well as our active military, our current veterans that are still with us, and those that have gone before us.
Hello, Chicago Club. We are at this very sacred place, Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery, where our fallen heroes are laid to rest, all the way from the Mexican-American War all the way to the Iraq War. The cemetery is actually full. They do allow some remains still in cremated remains, but there are family members interred here as well. It's a beautiful setting here at Point Loma in San Diego with the ocean. I can't imagine a more beautiful place. Okay, Chicago Club, we're at the beautiful Cabrillo National Monument, and as you know, the Chicago Club goes to a lot of historic areas, historic landmarks, national monuments, locally designated historic districts, national registers. So we have a park ranger with us, Amanda Gossard. She's going to explain the difference between a national park and a national monument. Thank you, Amanda. Between a national park and a national monument. Thank you, Amanda. And I love the I want to be this. I really want to have the hat. How about, can I buy the hat?
No, it's not for sale.
You got to earn it.
you got to earn it. Yeah,
I love this.
sure.
But anyway, thank you, Amanda. If you could explain that.
No problem. So, hi everybody. My name is Ranger Amanda, and I've been at Cabrillo National Monument for about 12 years. So it's great. I love being a park ranger. I love being in San Diego. Can't think of a better place to be. Behind me you will see the old Point Loma Lighthouse. Now this lighthouse was built in 1855 and it had a short lifespan, decommissioned in 1891. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson designated the quarter acre around the lighthouse as Cabrillo National Monument. Just basically saving that land, saving that structure, and also commemorating the landing of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who was the first European to step foot in what is now the west coast of the United States. Now, the difference between a national monument and a national park is that a national monument is designated via presidential proclamation, and a national park takes an act of Congress to designate. So we are a national monument. We are under the guise of the National Park Service, so that is who runs our organization and manages us. So if you want to turn over here, I will introduce you to our main man, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. As I said, first European to step foot on what is now the west coast of the United States, and he did this September 12, 1542. And September 28th, 1542. Now, if you look down below, you will see two plaques. And one plaque says that he is a Portuguese explorer, and the other plaque says that he is a Spanish explorer. The reason for this difference in these two plaques is because for a long time we thought that Cabrillo might have been Portuguese, but there was really never any conclusive evidence either way. Until 4 years ago, when a researcher who had dedicated her life to researching whether or not Cabrillo was a man of Spain or of Portugal, discovered some court documents where he swore under oath that he was a man of Spain.
Welcome to the next stop on our tour today. If you haven't been able to tell, we're at the USS Midway. Have we mentioned San Diego is really important to the Navy, and the Navy's important to San Diego? And this is really where it also begins. This is the #1 attraction in all of San Diego. And so we're very excited to be here today because it is phenomenal. The tour is difficult, so because of COVID, but we're going to tell you about the Midway now because it's such an important landmark and something important in our history. So here we are with Hoffy again, and he's going to lead us through the Midway without having to get off your sofa. Enjoy the tour.
Hi everybody. As Dorothy said, the USS Midway is actually on TripAdvisor the #1 attraction in San Diego, even more than the zoo, which kind of surprised me. Before we look at the Midway, take a look at the skyline of San Diego. As I said before, it's the second largest city in California, and they've really built a lot of beautiful condos and apartment buildings in the downtown area. And I think if you look at some of the architecture, they have a lot of balconies and very interesting articulation instead of just reflective glass. But let's get back to the Midway. You can see the Midway is number 41. It was the 41st aircraft carrier commissioned by the U.S. government, by the Navy. It's also the longest serving aircraft carrier of the 20th century. It was named after the Battle of the Midway, the decisive battle versus the Japanese in World War II. And if you go into the Midway, I really recommend seeing the movie, The Battle of the Midway. It's fascinating how the Navajo code breakers were actually able to tell the U.S. military where the attack would come. But the Midway was not commissioned until after World War II. So it saw a lot of active duty in the Atlantic, but it also had active duty during the Vietnam War and the first Gulf War, the Persian Gulf War. But you can see, the reason it's so interesting, if you look at the flight deck, when you go to the Midway, you meet the veterans who flew the planes. You learn how, with a steam-fired engine, they catapulted these planes in the middle of the ocean. And they had to time it perfectly so that the pitch of the runway was going up when the plane would take off. And the plane had to be at full throttle. So I'm not a military expert, but you don't have to be to enjoy the USS Midway. I recommend going to the flight deck. And the pointer, I'm going to imitate the pointer like this, means that they pull the plug and the plane is catapulted. This is the fabulous USS Midway.
Welcome to the next stop on our tour today. If you haven't been able to tell, we're at the USS
To the right,
Midway.
we can see the famous statue, the Kiss, and it's a beautiful attraction here in San Diego. Okay, so your head is back. So everybody, this is the Piazza della Familia, which is a beautiful plaza that closed Date Street. San Diego has a really good planning department, and they do a beautiful job with urban design. So look at how you have this very colorful architecture, mixed-use zoning, and it creates a beautiful sense of enclosure. So this is very, very popular, and this is part of Little Italy. Little Italy is doing a really good job providing housing and good food options and shopping. I think Little Italy is one of the best villages in San Diego. San Diego calls itself a city of villages. Have you ever seen a more beautiful pedestrian street? We are now entering Balboa Park, named for Núñez de Balboa, the Spaniard who so-called discovered the Pacific Ocean. This is Balboa Park, and it is, I think, one of the most beautiful urban parks in America. San Diego, back in the early 1900s, wanted to have an urban park, and they brought in Frederick Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park and many famous urban parks. But then they decided to hire a man named Bertram Goodhue. He was a New York architect, and he fell in love with the Spanish colonial architecture. And they had a great World's Fair called the California Panama Exposition to commemorate the opening of the Panama Canal. So here is the California building designed by Bertram Goodhue in 1915. So think about this, these beautiful buildings were to not only have a great exposition, but to commemorate the opening of the Panama Canal. Look at the beautiful tile work. And you can go up on top of the tower. So now we're entering Balboa Park. And if we look to your left, you can see the very ornate Spanish colonial architecture. There are approximately 21 museums here, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And also, remember that it's 1915, and in those days, urban planners believed in having an axial plan. It's called Baroque or axial planning. You want to have a landmark and a long vista line, so you can see the fountain in the background. This is the idea of a formal axis, the way the French would put the Arc de Triomphe, or in Washington, D.C., the way they would put the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Memorial and Capitol Hill. So now we're entering the center part of Balboa Park. You can see the Museum of Modern Art. You can see the Casa del Prado. The word Prado in Spanish means meadow. Here's the statue of the Spanish El Cid, who fought the Muslims and kicked them out of Spain back in the Middle Ages. Here is the Spreckles Pavilion. That's where they play organ music. So here's the Prado building. You can see Bertram Goodhue used a very, very ornate type of Spanish colonial architecture. He really captured the romantic view of Spain when he built this beautiful exhibition for Panama and California. And there's a very well-rated restaurant, one of the top-rated restaurants. As we pan to the left, you can see the Museum of Modern Art with the statues of famous Spanish artists. Velázquez is one of them, so is Goya. So everybody, this is the Piazza de la Familia, which is a beautiful plaza. They closed Date Street. San Diego has a really good planning department, and they do a beautiful job with urban design. So it's a National Historic Landmark. Remember the wonderful ranger at the Cabrillo National Monument talked about the various types of designations. This is the highest honor a place can get in the United States. Okay, so you can see that Old Town is celebrating Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, which is November 1st and November 2nd. It's becoming a really popular holiday, even in Southern California, maybe throughout the world.
Hi everyone,
So you can see
welcome to the Chicago Club Travel Show. We're so happy you've joined us today. It's August, and in our continuation of finding great places for you to visit, we are here in Pasadena this morning. It's pretty warm, but we have a great day planned for you because we're in Pasadena. Now I know we usually stay close to the Laguna Woods Village, and today we're 65 miles away. But trust me, it's worth the drive because we're going to show you so many beautiful things. Now when you say Pasadena, everybody thinks the Rose Parade. Everybody thinks the Rose Bowl, football. And even if you're a space geek, you may even think of JPL. But today it isn't about those. Their heritage is great and the treasures are wonderful. But we're going to show you some of the beautiful unknown sights of Pasadena and the surrounding area for you to enjoy. We're standing in front of a pretty famous building, and we're also on Orange Grove Boulevard. And you all know what Orange Grove Boulevard is. It's where the Rose Parade starts. But there's no parade today, but this is as close as we can get. So I'd like to introduce Hoffy, our tour guide for the day, and we're starting here at the Tournament of Roses house. So here's Bill Hoffman.
Thank you, Dorothy. Hi, Chicago Club. How are you? You know, I grew up in South Pasadena, and I love this area, but I didn't realize, because I was just a high school kid, how much beautiful architecture and history is in Pasadena. Pasadena started as a resort community for people from Indiana who wanted to escape the bad weather. They came out to the San Gabriel Valley, and even in the winter it was warm, and it became a health resort. They built some very large hotels like the Raymond Hotel and the Green Hotel. People suffering from rheumatism and other diseases found the gardens out here absolutely beautiful. So Pasadena was incorporated actually in 1886. So then a lot of wealthy people started building large mansions up and down Orange Grove in the late 1800s, and this area became known as Millionaire's Row. We'll take a look at the Wrigley Mansion, talk about a millionaire. It's a beautiful Beaux-Arts Italianate building, and that's where they crown the queen and the court for the Tournament of Roses. This was just one of the many, many mansions on this beautiful street. I actually think Orange Grove is one of the most beautiful boulevards in the United States. So then what happened was in the early 1900s, a group of artists and architects discovered a movement called the Arroyo School, and they started building beautiful craftsman architecture. And Pasadena became ground zero for the Craftsman Bungalow. And we're going to see the two most beautiful bungalows, the Gamble House and the Blacker House. This movement was a reaction against the industrialization that was happening throughout the world. These craftsmen wanted to build their own furniture, design their own tiles, and they did a beautiful job. So we will see some of these craftsmen bungalows. But Pasadena is not done yet. Despite being the ground zero of the craftsman movement, starting in the 1920s, there were a lot of people who wanted to live in this beautiful climate, and they built period revival architecture. Spanish colonial, Dutch colonial, French colonial, all these beautiful styles, including Victorian. And they built some of the most beautiful neighborhoods in Southern California. We're going to show you the best of those neighborhoods. And the story's not over yet. They started to build a nice town center, but it began to decline in the 1930s. The Depression meant that a lot of the mansions were torn down. They became boarding houses. They started building apartment buildings, and Pasadena definitely declined. But something special happened. In the 1970s, the preservation movement discovered all this beautiful architecture, and they started to preserve Old Town and some of these neighborhoods. And Pasadena today, and there's a group called Pasadena Heritage. I urge you guys to look that up on the internet. Look at all the beautiful tours they sponsor. So Pasadena, believe it or not, now has 17 historic districts, and that's because of the preservation movement. And I believe that Pasadena's town center was the earliest and the best town center in Southern California. So we're going to tell you the story of Pasadena that a lot of people don't realize. So I hope you enjoy it, because we're going to have a lot of fun. Okay, thank you. Full Orange Grove Boulevard. It's got the magnolia trees. It's got the magnolia trees and all these palm trees and those beautiful globe street lights. This is where, as we said before, they crown the queen. But it's just a beautiful street. But if you come to the Rose Parade, it's so fun to walk up and down this street on January 1st, because all the floats are lined up on the street. And you can walk up and down and see the floats and interview the movie stars and talk about the people who are going to be on the floats. It's so much more fun than being in the stands. And it all happens on Orange Grove Boulevard. Okay, Pasadena was really known, it became famous as a health resort because of its gardens. Look at these palm trees. Many of them are over 100 years old. We have queen palms, king palms. The palm trees in the background there, the tall ones, are Mexican fan palms. You can see those in the background. And then if you pan over to the right, you will see Canary Island palms. And you'll also see some sago palms. But the interesting thing is, there's only one native palm tree in California, and that's the desert fan palm that you see in Palm Springs and the upper Mojave Desert and the Colorado Desert. But what would Southern California be without palm trees? The only criticism is they don't provide a lot of shade.
One thing that's very unique about the homes, particularly on Mansion Row, is a particular characteristic right here. This looks like it would be a motor court, but it's not. When these buildings were built, this is where the horse and buggy would pull in. So they would come up to this area and unload their guests, and then the guests would enter to the main entrance from here. So this was for the carriages and the horses. So when the guests were unloaded, then they would proceed, and that building right there is considered the carriage house. And that's where they would put the carriage, and the horses would be stored outside. And you're going to see that throughout the day, because when these houses were built in the 1800s, guess what? There weren't any cars. So today it looks like it would be a carport or a motor court, but it's not. When it was built, it was the carriage house, and it was where the carriages would offload with their guests.
We are at the Gamble House in Pasadena. It was completed in 1908 by Charles and Henry Green. They were the most famous builders and designers of craftsman architecture. And you can see the woodwork involved. You can see the projecting eaves. You can see up above in the chimney how it has some decorative stonework and brickwork. It's just a masterpiece. In fact, they call it architecture as art. And they designed all the furniture, all the lamps, all the rugs. They absolutely designed everything. This building is so famous, it's a National Historic Landmark. There's only 2,500 National Historic Landmarks in the U.S. That's how famous it is. And they built many bungalows in the Pasadena area, but actually by the 1920s, they had sort of burned out. They started out building period revival architecture, like some Tudor revival and homes like that, and then they discovered the beauty of craftsman architecture. Now the Gamble family from, I believe they were from Indiana, what's that? Yeah, Cincinnati, they loved Pasadena and they loved the climate. It was very helpful. And as you can see up above on the right-hand side, they loved the sleeping porches. So when it got too hot, they were able to sleep out in the balcony areas in these beautiful sleeping porches. So if you haven't been to the Gamble House, I highly recommend it. So we're going to walk up to the front door. Gamble House is a good example of the craftsman architecture. You can see the craftsman lamp, the leaded lamp. The Green and Green brothers also designed leaded windows, which are beautifully tinted. And they traveled to Japan, and they were very much influenced by Japanese design as well. Another feature you see in much of the house is how they've rounded off the wood. You'll see that in the stairway and throughout the house. This is a typical craftsman feature. The word bungalow actually comes from the Hindi word bangala, which means well-ventilated cottage. But it's nowhere in the United States where the bungalow has gone to such great design heights as the craftsman bungalows of the Green and Green brothers. This is a good place to see the sleeping porch and how they contoured the eaves, projecting eaves to make it more decorative. Absolutely beautiful. Some people, when they tour the house, are surprised that it's kind of dark because they didn't have the lamps weren't very powerful in those days. And many craftsman homes were kind of dark actually, but very, very cozy. They were meant in a sense to blend in with nature. Some of the craftsman bungalows have beautiful tiles called Batchelder tiles that decorated the chimneys and the fireplaces. And by the way, you can go online if you want to see the inside of the Gamble House. Go to gamblehouse.org on the internet and take the virtual tour. Terrace. This is one of the many historic districts in Pasadena. This is a beautiful home. This is a Victorian home. It's got some Queen Anne characteristics. Take a look at all the spindle work and all the tremendous surface detail. They look like fish scales. Victorian architecture was right at the turn of the century, and the next period was craftsman, followed by period revival. So this is a great example of Victorian architecture, mostly of wood. And as we cruise down, the Green and Green brothers built 6 homes on this street. and we're going to take a look at several. Here is one they did not design. This is a Dutch colonial, a beautiful home overlooking the Rose Bowl. Now on the corner is a good example of a craftsman bungalow. You can see the pergola, you can see the projecting eaves, a sleeping porch, a well-ventilated craftsman bungalow. One of their largest, actually. Now, they used a lot of stone and brick, and you can also see the craftsman lamps that are hanging down. But we're going to come upon some arroyo stone pathways and walls that were incorporated into the craftsman look. So these were taken from the Arroyo Seco, and they were incorporated into the porches and the walls. Another thing the Green and Green brothers did is they used clinker bricks. These are bricks that were deformed. They were overbaked in the factories, but they were so interesting that the Green and Green brothers liked using them. And here you can see they're incorporating them with the Arroyo stones. And by the way, look at this beautiful door to a garage. And all this architecture was from 1905 to 1915. So we're going to take a look at this Arroyo stone work. And the best example of the clinker brick is coming up, where on one of their homes they built this massive with Arroyo stones. So here it is. I'd like to have this in my front yard. All the neighbors would be jealous. So this is the clinker brick look. For you, Chicago Club, Pasadena is so rich in architecture that the most famous architect in the United States, Frank Lloyd Wright, designed this house in 1923. It's called the Millard House, or La Miniatura. And as you can see, this is his textile block period. What he did was he took concrete blocks and made a special design and recreated them and built the house out of textile blocks. You will also see this at the Hollyhock House in Hollywood, as well as the Innes House. Frank Lloyd Wright only built about 5 houses in the Southern California area, and this beautiful design is one of them. Some people call it Mayan revival because the block looks a little bit Mayan, but I don't think the designs are Mayan. I think they sort of look a little bit like Art Deco, and I think in some ways they were uniquely Frank Lloyd Wright. But this is a private home. You can't get inside, but it sits on the Arroyo Seco and is truly a jewel. Prospect Street, it's a beautiful historic district. I love it for the camphor trees. I've never seen such a tree canopy anywhere in Southern California. These camphor trees touch at the top, forming this beautiful green room. And Pasadena, this neighborhood, is over 100 years old, which explains the size of the trees. Pasadena, as well as South Pasadena, are arbor cities. You can't tear down a tree unless you get a permit. Okay, Chicago Clubbers, here we are at California Institute of Technology, Caltech, opened in 1891. It's one of the most famous research institutions in the world. And by the way, the scientists who started Jet Propulsion Laboratory first worked here. I love the architecture. This architecture is done by Bertram Goodhue. You can see that he has some Spanish colonial influences, but there's definitely some modern lines. And if we look at the domes, we can see some Art Deco details. So Bertram Goodhue, let's walk through them all a little bit. Bertram Goodhue was the architect in the early 1900s. They wanted to bring sort of a Spanish modern look to the campus, and he built what they call the Bechtel Mall. And he brought some beautiful Spanish colonial imagery along with some Art Deco influences and built this beautiful mall. And he did the whole plan for the campus of Caltech. Remember, it was Bertram Goodhue who designed Balboa Park. And he also did the LA Public Library. But you can see there's a certain elegance to the rounded Roman arches. There's a lot of Spanish colonial and Art Deco plaster appliques and designs which add some flavor to the area. And it's just a beautiful campus as well as doing fantastic research. But architectural purists are disappointed about one thing. Back in the 60s, they decided to build the Millikan Memorial Tower right in the middle of campus. And what an eyesore. I'm sure there's great research that goes on there, but it totally ruined Bertram Goodhue's plans, and they had to tear down an auditorium. This is an example of the Goodhue. He loved the Art Deco and the designs that come sort of from Spain and Mexico that he put on the side of these large stucco buildings. So he provided some nice ornamentation. So they give tours of Caltech monthly. It's an architectural gem. The Beckman Auditorium by Edward Durrell Stone. It was built in 1964. So let's come and take a look. It's right in the middle of the Caltech campus. A lot of architectural historians call it a modern interpretation of a Roman temple. And there it is. You can see it almost has an Islamic look with the projecting roof and then the supporting columns. And I like the crisscross pattern, and I think the lamps are really interesting. So this is a fascinating building on the Caltech campus, Edward Durrell Stone. You can see it certainly doesn't match the modern Spanish interpretation of Bertram Goodhue. And then if we pan off to the right here, we can see unpainted concrete. That's an example of 1960s academic brutalism. This is typical in the 60s when they would make large buildings of concrete unpainted. So this is an example of what architectural historians call brutalism. But I hope you've liked taking a look at the Beckman Auditorium.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you had such a great time. We did. The treasures of Pasadena are unbelievable. And there's so many points of history, so many beautiful homes. It just doesn't end. Unfortunately, our show has to end. But remember, Pasadena is famous for its Rose Parade. Pasadena is famous for its football game on January 1st. So until next time, here's my rose. I'm going to the parade.
This is Bill Hoffman,
Bye.
Hoppy here. Beautiful day. It's almost December. And as you know, this is our third show. We started in San Juan Capistrano. Our last show was in San Clemente and Dana Point. We decided to travel north to beautiful Newport Beach. So So this is a nice little plaza here in this shops at Mission Viejo, or I should say the outlets at San Clemente. I was confusing my malls. But
Well, that's our show for today. I sure hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I enjoyed doing every bit of it. So here I am at a familiar destination. Does this look familiar to you? This is gate 3, and we're at the bus stop. And guess what? I'm ready. I've got my hat. I've got my sunglasses. I'm ready to go. Where's the bus? Where's the bus? Oh, I'm early. Well, guess what? If you haven't heard by now, the Chicago Club is starting our bus trips again, starting in September. I hope you've looked at our website and checked out all the great destinations. September, we're going to the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach Aquarium and even Point Fermin and having a harbor tour. October, we're downtown, classic downtown, with the Cathedral, Union Station, and lunch at San Antonio Winery. And November, we're doing the classic San Diego trip again. Another harbor cruise, hope you're not seasick, and Old Town, Gaslamp District, Balboa Park. It's going to be great in San Diego. And last but not least, December, Christmas, the Reagan Library in Simi Valley. Really, the FBI exhibit's still there. You get to go on his Air Force One, and there's going to be Christmas trees all decorated to enjoy the season. So check our website, and please be sure to register because the trips are filling fast. Have a good time today. We sure did. We've enjoyed this whole thing. And next time, we'll see you on the bus. Bye-bye.